The story of Anatoly Moskvin made headlines across the country in November 2011. Police officers discovered 26 dolls in his apartment, which turned out to be the bodies of deceased girls. For 10 years, Moskvin had been digging them up from cemeteries in different areas of the region and then drying them using a special solution made of salt and baking soda. On the day of his arrest, there were many journalists near his house. "They didn't let us inside, but we saw dolls being carried out of the apartment," said a journalist from Nizhny Novgorod. "They looked like rag dolls covered with fabric. They say there was no smell in the apartment, but that's not true. There was some kind of stench even outside. It was like when you go up to an attic and there's an old chest with the smell of dampness mixed with decay, something like that." According to her, one of the witnesses who was in Moskvin's room filled with dolls fainted and her nose started bleeding. After the woman regained consciousness, she began to have a hysterical fit. Investigators from the investigative committee later reported that the woman was screaming, clutching her hands to her chin, saying that she wouldn't touch anything in that apartment and wanted to leave the street as soon as possible. It took quite an effort to calm her down and continue working. However, even the nerves of the investigators were frayed. During the interrogations, they often had to take breaks because they couldn't listen calmly to Moskvin's revelations. According to a source in law enforcement agencies, if it weren't for the mummies, Moskvin's apartment, where he lived with his parents, would have looked completely normal: a Soviet interior, lots of books, porcelain dolls on the shelves. Moskvin kept the dead dolls in his room. Almost all of them were dressed in dresses and sat on the couch. Some mimicked a tea party. There was a children's toy tea set on the table for them. Mechanisms for musical toys or music boxes were embedded inside the mummies. When they were being taken out, music could be heard from the bodies, which was creepy. In some of the bodies, investigators found the personal belongings of the deceased. Inside one, there was a piece of gravestone with her name sewn into it, and in another, there was a hospital tag with the date and cause of her death. Moskvin improved the decomposed bodies. He stuffed them with rags, covered them with nylon stockings, and sewed the heads of plush toys onto them. He inserted buttons in place of the eyes or toy ones so they could watch cartoons with him. During interrogations, Anatoly claimed that he loved his girls and took care of them as if they were alive. "You were getting rid of bodies, and I was picking them up," Moskvin would say. Each of his girls had her own name and story. Among them were the unwanted children that he kept in the garage. During the interrogation, Moskvin explained that he dug up the bodies out of loneliness. He was single and dreamt of having children. He wasn't allowed to adopt a child because of his low salary as a university lecturer. In May 2003, I had an argument with my parents because they wouldn't give me their blessing to adopt a girl from an orphanage. That's when I told my mother that I would practice black magic and communicate with the spirits of children, mummify their bodies, and keep them at home. My mother replied that I could do whatever I wanted. I was very upset and went for a walk in the Krasnaya Etna cemetery to calm down. On that same day, I found an inconspicuous grave of a girl. I decided to dig it up. On the evening of May 9, 2003, I came to the grave and dug it up to the coffin. I carved a hole in the coffin lid at the head and pulled out what remained in the coffin. It was in very bad condition, covered in larvae and heavily decomposed. The girl was dressed in a white blouse, a black skirt, white tights, and shoes. She had long hair. That's when I decided to try mummifying the body for the first time. I moved it to a remote corner of the cemetery and buried it in an abandoned granny's grave. To properly mummify a body, you need soda and salt. Moskvin called their mixture a vaccine. I bought these substances in a store, found old nylon stockings in a dumpster, and made bags out of them. I filled them with soda and salt and attached them to the remains. I changed these bags once a week. I dried the wet bags right there in the cemetery. When people noticed me, I told them I was feeding the birds. On July 25, 2003, I wrapped the body in different clothes and carried it home in my backpack. Gradually, other dolls appeared in his house. Almost all of them were in his room, and only one of them, Masha, he placed in his parents' room. They couldn't even imagine that for several months they lived in the same room as a corpse. They thought their son was making dolls from improvised materials. They didn't pay attention to the peculiar smell. It's hard to say what Moskvin felt after his secret life became public. But the lives of his elderly parents turned into a living hell. They became social outcasts. Neighbors stopped talking to them. Strangers tried to break the windows in their apartment and wrote insults on the walls of their house. His parents completely closed themselves off from journalists. The only person who managed to talk to them was a Moscow activist and a nurse from a psychiatric clinic. She visited the Moskvins in August 2013 and posted about it on her social media. According to her, the parents turned out to be intelligent pensioners, former engineers, both born in 1938. Mom Elvira Alexandrovna pressed against the wall when we entered. She was used to people coming for searches, taking away books and things. We were the first in 2 years who came to them not for looting and humiliation. They once called from the Let Them Talk TV show, wanted to invite them, but my mom refused. She said, "I can't endure such shame and ridicule again," wrote the girl, quoting Anatoly's mother. The elderly couple shared the story of their son's persecution. In 2010, Moskvin wrote an article in which he claimed that during the Tatar-Mongol invasion, Tatars had mistreated Russian women. Tatar historians accused him of extremism, and law enforcement officers took an interest in him. 8 police officers conducted a search at Moskvin's place, and that's when they discovered the dolls. A criminal case was initiated against him for desecrating the bodies of the deceased and the places of their burial. After the trial, searches, threats, and humiliations, my mother suggested to my father that they should die. My father said it couldn't be. My father had a heart attack, and my mother developed diabetes. They spent a year attending investigations. The judge told my mother he went insane because of his vast knowledge. Moskvin's parents wanted to sell their apartment, but they couldn't find buyers due to its history. In the end, they invited a priest to their home, and after he blessed it, he said, "All your problems arise because you don't go to church." Since then, they've been attending church together regularly and continue to visit their son in the hospital, bringing him homemade food. Due to the strong medication, he moves very slowly, speaks poorly, is losing his vision, can't write, and has excessive saliva. He sleeps most of the day and remains almost unresponsive to conversation. He smiles a little, only when his mother starts talking about their cat Barsik. Journalists also spoke to acquaintances of the parents of one of those girls. Anatoly had dug up a little girl named Vika, but apparently she didn't fit for the dolls, so he returned her. For the mother, the journalist noted, it was unbearable to go through her daughter's funeral twice. The parents shared the tragic details of their son's life. According to Moskvin's mother, he was an excellent student, a quiet child who spent all his free time studying languages. He was constantly bullied at school. When he was in the 3rd grade, he became a victim of bullying. Moskvin's mental problems began when he was 13, after he underwent the betrothal ritual with a deceased girl. He later described this story in his diary, and a few years later, his colleague, a journalist from Nizhny Novgorod, published it. On March 4, 1979, our school was collecting waste paper, Moskvin recalled. We went to the entrances, rang every doorbell, and demanded old papers. There was a coffin lid near one of the entrances. The day before, they had told us that a girl had died in the neighboring school. Natasha Petrova was taking a bath, and when she got out of the water, she touched an exposed wire and instantly died from the shock. She was only 11. When we came out of the entrance with waste paper, we stumbled upon a coffin being carried out. Apparently, Natasha's mother was a member of some section. To start with, none of her classmates attended the funeral, but several dozen women and men in black clothes came. They all held burning candles and sang something mournful in an unfamiliar language, not in Russian. A crying woman, probably the deceased girl's mother, gave me a large Hungarian apple and kissed me on the forehead. She led me to the coffin and, promising me lots of candy, oranges, and money, told me to kiss the deceased. I burst into tears, begged her to let me go, but the sect members insisted. They started singing prayers in an incomprehensible language again, and some adult forcibly pushed my head to the waxen forehead of the girl in a lace bonnet. I had no choice but to kiss where I was told. I did it once, twice, and a third time, and then I was ordered to repeat a long incantation after the priestess in Old Russian. When the spell was over, they told me to take a candle and drip wax onto Natasha's blue dress. Then they handed me 2 worn copper rings, telling me to put one on the bride's finger and the other on mine. Closer to the end of the school year, Natasha started appearing in my dreams almost every night, singing awkward songs. My lifeless bride demanded that I, in my dream, agree to study magic and promised to teach me everything. She only needed my consent. I, of course, was against it. In the summer, I went to the countryside, and the nightly visits stopped. But they resumed on the very first night when I returned to the city. Natasha appeared to me as if in a haze, and soon I began to feel her presence through a peculiar chill. I started having hallucinations, and at night, I began to ramble. The doctor my parents turned to for help explained this phenomenon as hormonal upheaval. Growing up, Moskvin went on to teach philology and foreign languages at the university. He was a true polyglot, knowing 13 languages. However, at some point, he had a conflict with his colleagues, and they insisted on his departure. After that, Moskvin started earning a living by tutoring at home, writing articles for the local newspaper, and engaging in necropolitics. Anatoly traveled all over the Nizhny Novgorod region on foot, slept in coffins, and drank water from puddles in the heat. In an interview, Moskvin mentioned that he had been interested in cemeteries since childhood, starting with that same betrothal incident. Over 2 years, he visited 752 cemeteries, covering about 30 kilometers a day. Several years later, in 2012, Moskvin gave another interview. While in a courtroom cage, he spoke with journalists who managed to reach him with their questions. Everyone was curious about how a local historian could remain unnoticed for 10 years while digging up children's bodies, turning them into mummies, and keeping them in his apartment. According to Moskvin, from the very beginning, he knew he was committing a crime, but he felt sorry for the children. He wanted to bring them back to life. I just wanted there to be some material for future cloning, the defendant explained. So that they could live again, for the second time, because I felt very sorry for them. The necropolist mentioned that he kept his dark activities a secret for 10 years and was sure that none of the relatives of the deceased would ever find out. According to Moskvin, even his parents didn't know what the numerous dolls in their house were made of. I really wanted a child. Yes, I really wanted to have my own daughter, to pass on all the knowledge I had. I had a large library. I really wanted it. At first, my parents didn't allow me to adopt. They thought I couldn't handle it, but later, seeing how much I wanted it, they agreed. But then there were problems with the guardianship authorities because they said I had a small salary. And I really never pursued money. I always aimed for usefulness, for interest. According to Anatoly, initially, he dug up the bodies of children with whom he had a connection. Supposedly, they came to him in dreams, but then he started digging up anyone. The defendant noted that after excavating 26 bodies, he reached a dead end and didn't know what to do next. No new data appeared in his research. The problem was that he suffered greatly from loneliness, especially in the summer when his parents were away, and when they took away the cat. In May 2012, a trial took place. Moskvin was declared insane. The court exempted him from criminal liability and ordered compulsory psychiatric treatment. The prosecution was satisfied with the verdict and declined to appeal. Moskvin was sent to a psychiatric hospital for 6 months, but every 6 months, the court extends his stay for another half a year. In the summer of 2015, Moskvin underwent a repeat psychiatric examination, and on July 30th, his compulsory treatment was extended. The head of the investigative department of the Investigative Committee of the Russian Federation for the Nizhny Novgorod region referred to Moskvin's case as exceptional and having no analogues in contemporary criminology. Colleagues described the defendant as a kind, brilliant, and punctual research specialist, attributing his eccentricities to the whims of intellect. The last mention of Anatoly was on December 25, 2021. On that day, the court extended the criminal's stay in the psychiatric hospital for another year.